you're right. Yeah.
Okay, you are live.
Thanks, Morgan. Welcome everyone to Senate Education, Wednesday, April 3rd, 1:30 in the afternoon. I think we have a question here.
The phone panel, just hit the blue button.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're hired.
Right. So if you could go grab 5 copies. Yeah. Yeah, I'll tell you. So we are continuing. Yesterday, we had a walkthrough, very comprehensive, very good walkthrough of H630. This is the Boards of Cooperative Education Services, also known as BOCES. Representative Buss did a great job, as did Ledge Council. And now we're starting to dig in and have some testimonies. So with that, Mr. Francis, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. I'm Jeffrey Francis. I'm the Executive Director for the Vermont School Superintendents Association. Happy to be here with you today. I did have the opportunity to watch your testimony nearly in its entirety yesterday. So the walkthrough, Representative Buss's comment. And I decided at that point of watching them not to give you anything in writing because not because I wouldn't stand by what I said, but it was rather conversational and I thought it might go that way in this direction too. So I've highlighted the bill and specific sections that I want to speak to. But I first wanted to start contextually, and I hope that this responds in certain ways to the conversation that you were having yesterday. First, somebody, and I don't know who to attribute this to, talked about the utilization of this legislation, if it's enacted, to support the field in organically growing scale and efficiency. And I thought that that was a useful comment because sometimes when we think about the education delivery system in Vermont, we don't think about the diversity of the types of school districts that we have. We've got districts that would rival, I think, any suburban community in the country, all the way to the most rural districts you could find. And the purpose of this BOCES bill, at least as I understand it, and the Superintendents Association does support it, would to enable the collaboration of districts regionally to take advantage of their collaboration to improve both the cost and the delivery of services around nearly any element of what we try to accomplish in public education. Another way to illustrate that is as a example that I often bring up when we talk both about the diversity of the systems and also the nature of what they're trying to accomplish. And this goes back to probably 2013 or 2012, when there was a real focus on unfunded mandates, which occasionally comes up. And because the members of the Superintendents Association were so interested in that topic, we actually had a meeting over at 2 Prospect Street, which you visited. We had about half the superintendents in the state at the meeting. There were 30 or so there. And we spent a whole day looking at mandates. And in the morning, we looked at a 15-year history of what had been asked of school districts. And in the afternoon, we talked about the ability of the school districts to respond to those mandates. And I will not forget this, and I won't mention the names, but I will tell you that this is true. One superintendent from the Chittenden County region was very invigorated and enthusiastic. And as we went through the list of the mandates, she said, no problem with that one, no problem with that one, no problem with that one. And literally at the other end of the table, I looked and there was a superintendent who practically had their head on the table. And I said to that person, I said, what's wrong? And he said, I'm observing Elaine, now you know who it was.
I think we knew before.
Talk about their ability to get all this stuff done.
Yeah.
She said, in my system, we don't have an ability to get any of it done. And a lot of it had to do with access to resources, the density of the population, what they had for staff, perceptions in the community of what they needed for staff.
Was this a rural community?
Yeah,
Or it was,
as rural as you can get, and but a large system. So when you think about the notion of equity, and that came up yesterday, and what you're gonna provide to kids in their systems based on the characteristics of those systems. Which I think we have a tendency to underestimate. We got a real focus on equity for students. I don't think we are as focused on equity within the systems themselves. And I won't go off on a tangent on that right now, but I will say that challenge around equity is exacerbated in a year where you see 30 school district budget defeats. Because we've got districts that are going in the wrong direction in terms of the resources that they need. So when I,
But just to,
sure,
that's really interesting as people, maybe you already have that, back to what you said about the town's perspective on what a district may or may not need.
right,
I'm sure people are gonna continue to analyze that third that went down for a long time.
Mhm.
It's, there's a lot there. for sure.
right.
Yeah.
So with respect to the BOCES bill, this was not initiated by the Superintendent's Association. It came by House members who were the sponsors of the bill. We started to pay attention to it closely when it came under serious conversation over there. And just like you will have on Friday with superintendent witnesses, they testified over there. And I took note of the witnesses that you have on Friday. And 3 of them are gonna have very specific experience with BOCES. And I think that this is important too, in terms of how you think about this bill. So Brooke Olson Farrell, she lives in New York, and she sort of came out of the New York system. She's got a lot of familiarity with BOCES in New York and how they work. Mike Leichlighter, who was a superintendent in the greater Lancaster, Pennsylvania area, but is now over here at Harwood Unified Union School District. He's got familiarity with the Pennsylvania system. And Andy Skarzinski, who was a principal in Rutland and then went over to Wyndham Southeast, Brattleboro, left as superintendent in Wyndham Southeast and now is employed at a BOCES down in the greater New Haven, Connecticut area. I think when they come in on Friday, they'll each speak from their relative perspective. I think the point that I want to make by that is these BOCES derive their shape. By shape, I don't mean their physical configuration, but I'll speak to that. Their shape in terms of the services that they provide based on what the needs are, educational, operational, for the school districts they serve. To circle all the way back to the issue of equity, if the district in the Northeast Kingdom that I was referring to had been on the outer ring of Chittenden County, where a superintendent was saying, we can perform all this, if there was access to a BOCES in that region, then you really have the ability to invoke the phrase sort of rising tide floats all boats. Through collaboration, well-managed collaboration, concentrated collaboration, I believe that you can get better cost efficiency and you can get better product in terms of the education that you can provide in your system through that collaboration. I don't have a script, so I can't go off script, but I'll tell you what that causes me to think about. Supervisory unions, and some of the conversation yesterday was, are we adding in a extra layer of bureaucracy? I would say if you consider supervisory unions in their current context, that is a very reasonable question. You know, Act 46 was intended to get school district configurations, not create more elaborate supervisory union structures. And the difference is, right now, we've got districts that serve 6, 7 towns. It's a single district, one board, one administration, one central office. Supervisory unions, which is, I would maintain, while it still exists, it's an antiquated model, may have as many as in the Northeast Kingdom. One school district or supervisory union has 15 boards. Hard to operate. If you put a BOCES in to that system, then it seems like you do have too much bureaucracy and potential for additive costs. If you have a collection of school districts who have a single board and a single superintendent, the notion of collaboration gets that much stronger. The last point that I'm making in terms of sort of the overview is that when I think about BOCES, and I want to speak specifically to some of the components in this bill, one of the things you could gain if these were well operated is an ability to respond to the plethora of new legislation that's passed every year. Because when you think about implementation of any single piece of legislation, for right now, there's 56 central offices, superintendents and central offices in Vermont. When you pass legislation, they have to like divert their focus to enact that legislation. They've got to deploy staff within their central office. They have to concern themselves with how they're going to follow the law. If you have a BOCES type structure, then the responsibility for responding to that and supporting school districts and responding to that can be assigned to those BOCES.
Can you give us an example? Because the way that we talked about it yesterday was just, I mean, in my mind, it's like the purchasing power.
Yeah.
Maybe you become an expert in some area. Can you,
Well-
I'm just thinking of, all right, so we just passed the literacy bill.
Yeah.
Is there a way that you see BOCES helping to implement a bill like that?
Yes, I do, and very deep in my testimony here, and I'll try not to, to sort of go on too long. One of the points that came up in the House was a concern that BOCES would be used to allow the Agency of Education to abdicate its own responsibility in terms of professional learning, right? So to your left, Mr. Chair, is Colin Robinson. They talk a lot about Act 173 and what wasn't done as well as it could have been. But if you think about literacy and teacher training as one element, if you think about the ability to provide special services to children within the region itself rather than have to send them away, if you talk about things like purchasing collaboratives, which right now, if you ask business managers, what the value is in purchasing collaboratives, it's a debatable point based on the efficiency of the collaboratives themselves. BOCES, and this bill allows for this, has a lot of opportunity for the region, boards and administrators, to make decisions about how they want to deploy their collaboration based on what the pressure points are. So on the issue of abdication of responsibility, I mean, and I'll comment on this too. Right now, the education delivery system's in a state of flux because the field thinks that the agency should be responding in one manner, and the agency hasn't responded that way, right? So it's not a secret that there's not a lot of confidence in the agency right now on the part of the field. The agency would still have a role and should. But you can imagine if you had these regional collaboratives working well, that sort of the closer you get to the school system itself, the more effective your training could be. It would also be, in the case of training, directed by the school districts themselves, not by the agency. So right now, and I think Jay, who's going to testify after I will, there are effective collaboratives right now, like Champlain Valley, it's education development.
Champlain Valley Educator Development Center.
Right. The southeastern corner of the state from Hartford all the way down to Brattleboro, they've already formed up a BOCES-like entity. But so the point is, I think there's a lot of utility to this bill if it's implemented well. I think with a state system that has as much diversity and is as challenged as it is right now, I think enabling legislation would be useful when you envision a more efficient and effective structure. There's some specific points in here that I'll refer to though, that you might want, if you think it's a good way to proceed, you might want to lay your hands on this bill with regard to improving it. But in terms of the overall context, I think it's a useful piece of legislation, and could be beneficial to achieving both responding to the findings and, achieving the examples of functions that are articulated on the first 4 pages of the bill.
Mr. Francis, I tend to agree with you that it could be really effective in a good piece of legislation. The only thing, and I was thinking about this last night after we talked, and I'm curious to know your thoughts. There seem to be, and you alluded to it, so many moving parts right now.
Yeah.
We have a senator that would like to change the state board. There's a senator who might want to dissolve the state board. We have people in the other body that might want to go back to a commissioner. We have people who are thinking about consolidation. What I'm wondering is if in a way, does this all, I hate the piecemeal piece of all the things I just talked about.
Yeah.
And so that's where I'm struggling. Is there more of an opportunity to kind of take all of these issues out there and really kind of put them together in some way that allow us to take steps forward?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I mean, there's just those zillion little things
Yeah.
out there.
It makes a lot of sense. And it's rare that you hit the.
And I should say, I don't know if we should dissolve the state. board.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
No,
that's, you know,
no, and let me respond to it that way, this way. You've got a piece of legislation that was, well vetted in the House.
Mhm.
I thought the conversations that I watched yesterday were indicative of the fact that you're gonna give it the same kind of attention.
Mhm.
I think that, your decision around this bill ought to consider the question you just asked in terms of moving pieces. I think that something you ought to think about is if you have a bill which is enabling, right? And I want to refer to, I'm gonna speak to the dates of implementation for this here in a minute. If you've got something that is gonna be construed as useful, and you think that changes in the system are gonna be uneven in terms of how they take hold, then I think that this would not be a bad piece of legislation to pass, to have available to people as the state moves in certain ways in different regions. Now, that doesn't answer the big questions about like, what's the future of the education delivery system overall?
Right.
But if you believe that no matter what happens, there's always going to be some number of school districts,
Mhm.
like 50 school districts or 40 school districts,
Mhm.
and they're gonna have the general proximities that they have right now. And you're still gonna be asking them to do different things every year, which I would bet my last dollar that you will.
Mhm.
Then I think that this kind of a collaborative opportunity with structure makes sense. If you said, well, we really don't want to, we're gonna like flatten the whole system or potentially go to one school district only, then I think the issue of supporting the schools in that district sort of changes the context.
Mhm.
But if we're gonna have something that resembles a traditional education delivery system with some number of school districts, with some number of superintendents and central offices, then I think that this is a useful framework to have in place. So, I took note of the fact that in the findings, they say that Vermont's only one of 9 states that doesn't
Yeah,
have a
yeah,
BOCES structure right
yeah.
now. That's why I think on Friday, you're gonna have 3 different superintendents, one of whom is now in Connecticut, talking about what the form is there. One of the challenges that they had in the House Education Committee was Brooke Olson Farrell, who is gonna testify here on Friday, provided that the oil spill that they're dealing with at the school down there takes care of, that she can get away. She'll talk about, the New York system. People, they have different perspectives about how it could work. I think that if you pass enabling legislation, then we'll probably get a Vermont method for how it could work. So I wouldn't, I don't think you're subject to criticism if you say we're gonna wait, but I think that there's some utility to acting on it if you bring yourselves to that place. I'll, if you want, I can,
Yeah, sorry, I feel like.
Okay. I'm gonna get into specific points
Okay,
now,
yeah.
but so I can answer questions generally.
We have until 3, just so folks know.
Okay.
Oh,
Well, we have a bunch of witnesses.
okay, not just with Mr. Francis. Okay, 2 quick questions. You mentioned implementation.
Yeah.
And you may not be the person to answer this, but what would that look like? I'm still unclear what implementation looks like and who would really be in charge of it.
Okay, yeah. If I may, let me, the next point I was gonna make speaks to that question.
All right, and then I wanted to ask you a question about supervisory.
Okay. So, my reading of the bill allows the formers of these BOCES, which are the school districts themselves, to make determinations about the functions of the BOCES within the context of their organization agreements. So it would be the boards of so if you took a look at, any one of your regions and had a BOCES that was formed up by, let's say, 12 school districts, each school district would have a representative on the board, and they would meet as a deliberative body and make decisions about where they were gonna focus the BOCES. So the authority rests with the body politic, which is the BOCES system itself. Right now, and there's a reference in section 2 to formation of a board of cooperative education services shall be designed to build upon geographically focused cooperative regions used by Vermont superintendents. Since before I arrived at the Superintendent's Association in the late 1990s, there were collaborations of superintendents in school districts in 5 regions of the state. And when the House looked at a BOCES bill, they looked at those 5 regions because they largely fall around geographical and transportation corridors. So there's the Champlain Valley, who you've met with as a legislator, that goes from the Canadian border to Middlebury and over to the spine of the Green Mountains. And then from all the communities south of Middlebury, all the way down to Bennington or Pownell. And then there's the southeast region, which extends from Hartford all the way down to Brattleboro.
Yeah.
And then you got that map. So the testimony yesterday by Representative Buss implied that those were not really active entities until the pandemic. They got a lot more active in the pandemic. They were meeting every day.
Yeah.
Prior to that, they would meet every month and they would work on issues that were common interest, but they were largely responding to what's happening in the legislature or what's happening, in the collective bargaining arena.
Yeah.
And they focused less on implementation. The notion of the BOCES would beef that up. The regions seemed to hold reasonably. The reason the number went from 5 to 7, excuse me, and I discussed that with the committee, was when you take a look at any one of the regions and the reach, like from the Canadian
Yes.
border to Middlebury,
Yes.
you've got both a long transportation route, but also you got some different community dynamics. So it was my suggestion, they had 6, I said, why don't you make 7, just because we're not sure when they form up, what the formation will be.
So, if I may respond, so in my mind, as I still am trying to imagine what this would look like. So school boards are basically as a volunteer position. We know that the trend toward like civic engagement is diminishing over time. I'm just thinking about myself on a school board, like where would these folks get the time to do what seems like a lot of work? And I'm also wondering if there's also extra work on the superintendent, because I heard you talk about boards and I heard you talk about superintendents and I'm sure, obviously there's a way to do it because it's being done all over the country, but I'm still having a hard time picturing how it would get implemented.
Yeah.
We have a tough time, as Senator Dulux are alluding to, even finding people to run
Right.
for the legislature.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think it's a great question. If you think about what a BOCES would do, and let's say that you had a focus on purchasing, a focus on local but collaborative programs for special needs students. And you had an emphasis on improving the training of reading teachers, okay? You can envision a scenario where you'd have a board of the BOCES that would make a determination that they were gonna work on those 3 things. But the collaboration on each one of those functions The purchasing piece would go to business managers. Every school has one. Like, why don't you business managers get together and figure this out? The emphasis on programs for special needs students would go to the special ed directors who currently are searching for programs to put students into. And they would say, let's build a program that looks like this. That, a similar kind of thing's happening between Essex Westford and South Burlington right now, with the closure of some of the specialized schools up in Chittenden County. And on the issue of teacher training, you'd go to the curriculum leaders that will exist still in the school districts, because you still have curriculum personnel working within the school district themselves.
Alright.
So, you know,
I think it's happening organically anyway.
Yeah.
It would just be kind of expanding on the already organic connections that are happening.
well, it points people toward a structure where currently no structure exists.
But may I just follow up on this? Are you done, sir?
Yeah.
It seems like, could there be some conflict then with school boards? In other words, I'm thinking of the teacher training piece or some of these other things. Do you see any possible conflict?
I never see any possibility of conflict in any area of my life, including in this building.
Until it happens.
Including in this building. No, I mean,
You know what I'm trying to
yeah,
say?
there's always,
It's like two governing bodies.
yeah, so one of the things I want to talk about is the implementation dates, right? So under the current legislation, by July 1, 2026, school boards are supposed to make a decision. We see value in this and we want to pursue it, or we don't.
Yeah.
So I can envision a scenario where certain school districts are like, no, we're not gonna do it. But other school districts will say, they'll look at any one of the areas of opportunity, or probably more realistically, a combination of those opportunities, and say, we're gonna move in that direction. Now, here's a couple things to ponder. One is the timing. Given the questions that you've all asked yourself about the current state of affairs for public education in Vermont, does it really make sense to ask school districts? We're sitting here, it's almost July 1, 2024. You pass this legislation, it's a real short window in the total scope of things to have people make decisions about whether they want to go there or not. So one of the notes that I have in this testimony is, I think it'd be worthwhile if you favor this approach, to talk to the House and say, if we change that date, if we push that date out by a year or two, to let the kinds of, the big questions that you were contemplating settle a little bit more. I would hope they would say, if you want to change that to 2027 or 2028, would be okay with that. Because I think that the shape of the delivery system is going to change under what the deliberations that are happening currently.
Thank you. That was something I thought of yesterday as well. In looking at the effective date, and I think that it also kind of gets to the idea of how things are shaping up organically. Push it out by a year, and everybody knows that there's this structure that's coming, but it's a little bit down the road. It kind of gives more of a mold for some of the organic interfacing to work with this and get ready for it as it gets to the effective date, if it's pushed further. Yeah.
I had made a note, I'm looking at page 5 now, where it says creation of Board of Cooperative Education Services Organization Secretary approval. Establishment of boards, when the boards of 2 or more unions vote to explore the advisability. I wrote, my margin note there says cost benefit analysis. So you would hope that school districts who are contemplating these look at this as a cost benefit analysis, whether it gains them efficiency and economy and improved service by joining a BOCES versus not joining a BOCES. I also will say, frankly, that I think some school systems right now are not, they you know, this kind of a question posed today would be paralyzing to some districts. They wouldn't be able to, they couldn't know what to do.
Can't agree more.
But I think if you gave them, if cost containment and, you know, the whatever reconfiguration of the system we may see takes place over the next couple of years, they would presumably be better positioned to make decisions about it, because even though the notion of creating this new structure may be challenging, I think that when you look at the statement of intent and the kinds of things that you might gain through a bill like this, I think that the efficiencies and economies in a well-developed, well-implemented system are probably gonna materialize. Yep. Let me just wrap up with a specific section of this that I'm a little bit confused by, that I think would require more work if you're gonna proceed on this bill, is on page 8. It's section E on page 8. And I'll just read it. It says, Agency of Education promotion. The Agency of Education shall promote the use of BOCES as providers of education services and programs for local school districts and supervisory unions, and shall include consideration of grant applications that include the use of education cooperatives for the purpose of procuring services and programs. I was in the House Education Committee when they talked about that language. It made sense to me at the time. I read it many times over, and I'm not really certain what it means today. And for starters, and this doesn't really go to the to what the plain meaning is of it, but I would change the word from promote to something like explain or describe. Because if you've got objective judgments being made by local school boards with regard to the benefit of the BOCES in their region, I think that they should probably be left to make that determination without promotion by the AOE. Because I think that ultimately those communities are gonna understand how that BOCES could work for them more so than the AOE. And when you promote, you need to promote in general terms, and I think that these BOCES are specific operations, they're not general operations. And I think that the second half of that sentence, and shall include consideration of grant applications that include the use of cooperatives for the purpose of procuring services and programs. I think what's intended there is to say that BOCES can be considered for grant proposals from the agency itself. But I would urge you, and I may, maybe it's so simple and I'm just missing a big point. But that's a section that I think would be worth getting a little bit more explanation on.
Well, the word promote is loaded with bias to
Right,
begin with.
Right,
And then if it's gonna have an effect on who gets grants and that, yeah,
right.
I agree, that's.
And then on page 14, that is the transition report. That was the section where it says on or before July 1, 2026. I wouldn't, because as I already established, I don't like conflict. I wouldn't, on my say so, change that to 2027 or 2028, but I might send is the word emissary to the House Education Committee and ask if they're like, would they be amenable to a later date in order to let whatever's happening with the system happen, for you ask districts to make those moves. And so in general, I think it will be useful. I totally appreciate the fact that you've got an interest and concern about the overall state of the system.
Related to that, if I may, what if we were a future legislature, and I think this is coming, given everything out there, we move toward having fewer schools.
Right.
We all know the story, heard some last night also, certain school, I don't remember where it is, 7 students are in it. And does this in any way, would it prevent or harm? Would it sort of get in the way of closing school? I mean, how do you see that interaction?
I think the services are district specific.
So it's not.
And the school issues are gonna be inter-district, right?
Yeah.
They're gonna need
Yeah.
to make considerations. Supervisory unions are a little different because you've got, a lot of school districts in one governing structure. But, as you know, there's a lot of conversations going on, including in this committee, about what the future is. And if if you're going to reduce costs or the rate of increase of costs, then you need to look at what the major cost centers are. And the major cost centers are personnel. 80% of the cost of operating school systems is in personnel. And another big cost center is the number of facilities that you operate.
Yeah.
And when you've got an analysis of the facilities in the state that we have in this state, with a large percent of them approaching their useful life, you've got an opportunity to make decisions. And I would add the qualifier hard decisions. Because this system is what it is, because there's been a lot of, in many instances, justifiable protectionist mentality around what it is we're gonna retain. And the retention always goes to human resources and the physical buildings. We also, as I alluded to in my testimony, we're additive in terms of the requirements that we put on schools. So at the same time that we lament the number of schools that we operate and the number of personnel that we employ, we're adding things to them, both in the educational sphere and in the human service sphere. And I could talk about that, and you can too, what schools are doing and the expanding mission, but I think that Ray McNulty, who was the superintendent down in Wyndham Southeast and also up in Enosburg and Franklin, he used to say, you can have anything you want, you just can't have everything you want. And I think that is the place we are in right now, collectively.
Sarah Gillett?
Did I hear you suggest, and you may not have, I could be way off base, that BOCES could potentially replace supervisory unions?
No, I didn't say that.
I read between some
Yeah.
me.
I mean, so they're probably some supervisory union superintendents who are watching my testimony right now, and I'm kidding. Supervisory unions are not among the features of our delivery system. Supervisory unions generally are less efficient because they've got a lot of boards.
Yeah.
With making a lot of decisions that are not necessarily consistent with one another. And I think that BOCES it's a different animal of sorts. Because you're not concerning yourself with the governance of the entire array of school districts. You're basically saying the school districts are gonna govern themselves. But for these areas that we are specifically going after efficiency and effectiveness on, because we see the benefit of collaboration. We're going to collaborate, and then we're gonna put in the hands of both the board and professionals, like a really focused pursuit of those things.
It's not a governance structure.
No, it's a service entity.
Got it. That's actually really helpful to say it that way, service
Yeah.
agency.
Or entity,
Entity.
yeah. It's like, what can we collaborate on? It's like a co-op, it's got the same sort of a principle as a co-op, except it delivers services rather than goods.
Sarah Weeks?
Just for clarity.
Yeah.
So BOCES versus, I call them super unions, but like a supervisory union.
Right.
You think that your recommendation is to leave supervisory unions alone, create BOCES, let them do different, one doing governance, the other doing maximizing efficiency on services. Is that kind of the approach?
Yeah, I was concentrating on you talking about supervisory unions, and my brain almost disengaged at that point. Because I was recollecting Act 46. So one of the purposes of Act 46 was to see supervisory unions merged into school districts. And a lot of them did, like, I don't have the number off the top of my head, but we made tremendous progress in going from a supervisory union model to a school district model under Act 46. You then have a single governing board, and you get to make decisions about how you're gonna deploy the resources of that school district across the schools in that district. So I'm sorry, but I lost you there. What was the second half of your question?
Well, where to put your efforts?
Right.
So consolidating supervisory unions
Right.
or BOCES.
Right.
And essentially have them serve two different functions.
Right.
But in parallel.
Right. If there was a notion that we were gonna take existing school districts and put them into a newly formed supervisory union where you would have a multitude of school districts or more than one school district with each with their own governing body and one central office, superintendent, and I'd say don't do that, because I think that it complicates the governance picture and it complicates the life of the central office, which is now responsible for managing or overseeing not only two districts, but also two governing boards. So I wouldn't do that. I would rather see, and I think that, I'm speaking for myself now, but I think the association would definitely stand behind it. If there was gonna be further consolidation, I would say continue the Act 46 approach of combining existing school districts into a single school district. And I'll speak specifically about that because it's been stated publicly in the conversations that the House Education Committee is having. 4 years ago, the three superintendents in Addison County, so Addison Central, Addison Northeast, Addison Northwest, and Mount Airy School District. They had a meeting with Dan French and they said, we can see the trajectory of enrollment in Addison County. Our schools are all shrinking. We think that there ought to be a state directed initiative to combine those three districts into a single district. And it was in the post-Act 46 era, and a lot of blood was spilled over Act 46. And the response came back that we don't see any political appetite to do that. My point is, you're gonna get more efficient systems if you merge districts into a single district with one governing body than you would be to take any configuration of either existing school districts and supervisory unions and making bigger entities.
But the concept of a BOCES, if you had a larger supervisory union, couldn't they deal with both governance and services?
I don't, yeah,
Do that.
well, I mean, I think that's a great question. It depends on where the voter comes in, right? So right now, in Vermont, we maintain it's a historic pattern of everybody votes on select board, school boards, and so on and so forth. That's, what we are as our culture, our history. BOCES, well, and despite the history, the complexity of the system has only expanded in terms of special programs for kids, what you're trying to deploy educationally. So the BOCES response, and I think it probably is proven to be useful in other states, has been, we're gonna allow collaboratives among existing districts to make decisions about what types of services they need that they can gain efficiency through the services specifically, not necessary through governance. So I wouldn't dispute the theory. I just don't think that it's been commonly applied anyplace. I think it's keep the districts as sort of their own historic political or municipal entity in place, and then help them collaborate in terms of the kinds of services that as they evolve, are gonna need. So I think the two, I appreciate and respect that point. I think the two concepts are different.
So the old adage of widget, want it bad, get it bad. Okay,
What was the first part of that?
widget, want it bad.
Yeah,
If you want something really bad, then you get it really bad, meaning that it's not fully developed. So it's half baked. So WIPJIT, so we have 4 weeks. Pushing hard, House did a great job, they set us up, they kind of teed up a nice fly ball, and we're trying to figure out, you know, where to catch it and where to throw the ball back. So with only 4 weeks left, yesterday there was a conversation about, well, is a study necessary?
Right.
This is complicated. Is a study a different approach? Same premise, same concept, same thoughts, all the, you know, the same people engaged. Is a study potentially the right way to go, or should we finish this in 4 weeks and launch it? Your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it's my opinion. You don't have studies up on that shelf. You've got statutes. You could have studies. You could load those shelves with studies that have amounted to nothing. I'm not trying to be cynical, but you could. I think that, well, let me say this, I know you won't give me, nor do I want responsibility for you acting precipitously. Thanks for the testimony, Jeff. Now let's vote it out of committee. I don't want you to do that, because I think your process is really, really good. The intent section and the example of function section on this bill is as well as as good as I've seen in any bill I've ever read. I mean, it really goes to the point of what it is these BOCES can do. I think the better question in my mind is, what's the effect of passing this bill on a system that's under so much stress and pressure right now?
Sure.
and may change.
Right.
We know it's gonna change.
Right, but I don't think having the BOCES bill enabling legislation
Yeah.
available for people to go get when you and they figure it out, because the need for specialized placements for students, for professional learning around things like literacy, for collaborating to utilize one person in a position that will serve 8 school districts, when those school districts might, and they would be inclined to do this, try to go find one for one of those people, whoever it is, for the district themselves. I think that is additive in terms of the cost structure. So if our main theme right now is to get a handle on cost and efficiency, which, it always is, but we also contradict ourselves by saying, go do this too. I think that in terms of useful bills over time to support the delivery of the public education system in a more cost-effective manner, I think this has promise.
Senator Williams, then we have other witnesses.
So,
I think Senator,
so I just want to make some comments.
Yeah.
First of all, this may be a stopgap, but we got a problem. And I think eventually the problem is going to go away. If we fix all the systems within the state of Vermont, the government, eventually people are all going to want to move. So our diminishing student population could be just a temporary thing. So as far as the, maybe as a stopgap or an interim fix, we got to start thinking about merging other schools or districts, but we don't have a plan. We need a vision for education in the state of Vermont. And BOCES, and I hate the term because that's such
right, we'll figure
the
that.
connotation
Yeah.
is such a New York term.
Yeah.
But, that's going to be a part of it.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate your sage advice and insight, because you've been there for a long time, but, I think that we need to have a plan that says, okay, this is our situation right now. This is how we're gonna deal with it, but eventually, in any event, you do a decision support template, the education population starts to change, then we have a plan for it. We don't have it.
Glenn.
We're looking at a new education secretary, potentially.
Right.
So,
Well, no, it's a good point to planning, yeah, please.
What's the, just out of curiosity, what's the issue with the term BOCES? I've heard that a few times.
I think it's too generic. It needs to be more specific. What do we intended to do? We
Yeah.
can come up with any acronym we want.
In New York State and other
Right.
states, it tends to be, it's catch-all for CTE students.
Right,
And
that's,
historically, it doesn't, people don't use it in a thoughtful way in other states. Maybe that's.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't had that experience, but I believe you.
Yeah,
it's not a bad system in New York State. But we have a unique situation in Vermont, and whatever we call this, whatever we want this to be, should have its our own brand. You know?
mind switching out, Colin?
Thank you.
Go ahead and,
You have to run the screen over there.
Okay. Do I need
No.
a name out for that taking? Is there something special about that? Tape?
I was just invited.
Oh,
to sit
you
there,
can.
No, no,
so-
Jay tried to
I
send me
thought we had
over.
to run the thing over.
There goes.
we seem upset. Leave it to me about it.
It's called theater. Theater.
Go for it.
Okay. Thank you. For the record, Colin Robinson, Vermont NEA, and I appreciate the conversation yesterday, the conversation you just had with Jeff Francis. I'll keep my remarks relatively brief. So I wanted, for us organizationally, this wasn't something that we were familiar with until the bill emerged. But what was interesting, a year ago, we had an annual meeting of our members, and a year ago, our members passed a resolution saying, and it was specifically from special education teachers, saying, we have so many students right now with significant needs, and we're not able to find places for them to get the supports they need. We need to do something to address this challenge so we can support students, support their learning, and help them to integrate back into our schools as full learners and citizens. And as soon as I saw this bill, I was like, this is the opportunity to do that. Because as was mentioned earlier, you've seen some of these nascent collaborations between Essex, Westford, and South Burlington, but we're hearing it from members all across the state. And I think you've heard from various constituencies about this need in the moment, which I think is indicative of evolving needs across the system for districts to find ways to address complex challenges that they're all facing that they might not be able to address in the most impactful, most efficient, most effective way in their own school district or supervisory union. So that was our entry point, is about the kids and about how to most effectively meet their needs. I think, as Jeff said, the findings, I think, articulate the value of this and the value proposition of it. I think it also articulates the vision, and I think some of the conversation we were just having about what is the vision for the future of our education system. I think it is one that is rooted in deep collaboration across communities, across SUs and SDs, about cultivating that shared vision and mission across those geographic spaces, where, as you see in the map in front of you, there is a historic connection, but informality, while important, doesn't always crystallize decision making, doesn't crystallize shared mission and vision for how to support our students. And I think that's the promise and hope of this. I also think that, as was mentioned earlier, there are, it also creates space for communities to elevate conversations beyond the students in their town or the students in their district. Say, I actually want to make sure the students in the district served by, Wyndham Central are served as well as Wyndham Southeast, and the kids of Rutland Town and Rutland City are served just as well as each other. And I think by regionalizing some of the scope of how we support our students, it can hopefully also kind of reorient how we think about how we support
Do you
it.
think it could do that?
I
mean,
do,
the only,
I do.
I had
I'm an eternal optimist, so.
Yeah, no, that's good.
I'm all
I
hoping to
generally
change
as well. I just thought 46 would get more of that to happen. And so maybe this will get people, I can see where conversations will be had around purchasing, but yeah, you could see then if questions of literacy, if questions of, where's their foreign language teacher pop up, yeah. If I think it through, yeah, you could see some of that stuff happen.
Well, and here's
Which would
another,
be great.
And as we
Image.
stitch, yeah, and as we stitch all the conversations that are going on right now together, you can see how this can become a tool for effective discussion, implementation, and application of various issues. Case in point, the one I've thought about a lot beyond supporting the students that I described earlier is school facilities and school construction, right? We've all read the report. We know we have significant needs. We know we have schools that are in various states of disrepair or need for sustainable futures. And at the same time, undertaking the process of building, studying, all the things that go into figuring out if you're going to build a new school or are you going to do it with newer and fewer or what that's going to look like. That requires an actual human or humans dedicated to that task to make sure that that project is done effective, efficiently, meeting, reflecting the students and community needs. And to me, that's also a perfect place for a BOCES, right? One district might not be able to hire that construction project manager for their, one construction project, but maybe a BOCES hires that person in service of their member districts to help facilitate those complex operational decisions across several SUs or SDs, right?
That's a really good example.
It's really fascinating to sort
Yeah,
of
I'll be
think about it
curious
that
on
way.
Friday if some of those states have
Yeah.
that kind of thing, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's a real possibility for sure.
So, and the final thing I just wanna, so that's all, we think there's value here, we think there's opportunity. Nothing of grand substance to add to what Jeff Francis spoke to. I did just given the conversation yesterday around, page 13 on the bill goes into issues related to employment, the pension systems, et cetera, et cetera. I just want to flesh that out a little bit contextually for you all. Basically, what we're doing there is these BOCES are setting up the potential for a new public school employer. And all that's doing is mapping current collective bargaining statute and pension statute to these new public school employer constructs. So the organizing statute in there, what's kind of curious, little factoid. Teachers who choose to get together and form a union do so under the teacher labor relations law. And that would allow teachers, should they so choose to have that right. It doesn't compel anything, it doesn't require, but if teachers who work for BOCES want to, they could. Interestingly, also, if you're a school support staff member, an unlicensed professional in school districts, you're actually covered by the municipal labor relations law. So that's why it references municipal. So that maps it over for, say, if there was a janitorial consortium that emerged across a BOCES, it would give those folks the ability, if they so chose to go through the normal processes to do that. And it's the same thing with BISTERS, which is the Vermont Teacher Retirement System, and BEMERS, which is the municipal system. The municipal system is the one for unlicensed school staff. And BISTERS, the teacher system, is for all licensed teachers, including superintendents, principals, et cetera, et cetera. So it's purely sort of conforming and kind of mapping those over, but I just wanted to sort of flesh that out
Yeah, thanks.
more specifically for you all.
So it sounds like it's fun.
We did?
So can I ask you some of the same questions, Jeff?
Sure.
BOCES versus super unions, it's, where should the effort be applied if we're going to apply only one, we're gonna pull only one lever?
Yeah, I mean, complex systems are by definition complex and take a lot of time. And I think that's what Jeff was referring to, time to sort of figure out what the future looks like. And I think that's what Jeff was referring to around the conversation with Act 56. I think that the potential with BOCES is to facilitate those regionalized conversations that perhaps at a future point in time lead to something like you're saying. Given the history of Vermont's education system, given our deep commitment to our local public schools and citizen and community input in those, this is a very logical and impactful step that might perhaps lead to that conversation or not. I don't, again, going back to the Act 46 conversation, which we quite frankly weren't as deeply engaged in as the superintendent, school boards, and principals. Those conversations literally tore communities apart.
Yeah.
And I think that this creates a space where some trust can be built, where collaboration can be developed, and perhaps a vision for the future can emerge.
Okay, so, okay,
Yeah, of course.
for sure. Second question. Same as I asked Jeff, study versus implementation, study versus like, you know, pause, study. I know, I'm asking for,
Okay,
from the end.
Okay.
So pause versus, study, pause versus 4 weeks, pull lever and launch.
I think what's exciting about this opportunity is just that it's an opportunity. It doesn't require anything. I think we have 41 other states that we know who have gone down this path, and I'm sure that some places have implemented it with incredible efficacy, and other places perhaps there's been more of an ebb and flow. At the end of the day, they exist in 41 other states because they, I presume, work, and so I think creating what passage of this bill will create the opportunity for that to move forward now. I don't know that anything we would learn anything new from a study at this particular moment that would better inform the efficacy or opportunity or possibility of this policy that would change from now until say next January when it potentially will come through.
Good. Yeah, no, yeah.
I was gonna ask Jeff, right out of runway.
For the record, Jeff Francis.
I like that.
So BOCES, BOCES responsibilities, tentative theoretical BOCES responsibilities versus AOE responsibilities. And then I'll just kind of like focus this on logistics, supplies, requisitions, that kind of thing. Do you have a thought on whether this should be AOE responsibility versus a regional BOCES? Is there any kind of feedback?
And if I may, just because it's yesterday, we did have a good conversation about should it be an arm of the agency, but the purchasing stuff.
Sure.
You were here.
Again, I'm not an expert in state government, but I believe that procurement for various things goes through building and general services. And so even within state government, there is a particular, I don't think AOE is purchasing its own toilet paper, for an example. I think it's probably going through BGS. The one thing that gives me pause on kind of elevating up the AOE, and I think we saw this with, again, others can speak to this better than I can, SSDMS, the Shared Data Management System. There was a vendor that was selected by the AOE. It ended up not being a vendor that worked well, and it caused a whole history of kerfuffles along the way. And so I think what is maintained with the BOCES structure is that local connectivity, even if it's a regionalized connectivity, that I think could get a little muddied if it were kind of brought up to the AOE. I think collaboration between the BOCES and AOE obviously should be deep and robust. But I think when it comes to kind of the nimbleness and the nuance of needs, I think you're gonna be able to be more responsive to that at the BOCES level than at the state level.
I totally agree.
Senator Williams, final question?
Just for you.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, I like the bill.
Yeah.
We set policy. We come and go every 2 years, potentially. So where's the continuity? Because I'm gonna use Act 127 as an example.
Okay.
We are all dealing with something that we didn't even know was gonna hit us. So if we put this implementation date out 2 years from now, where is the continuity to make sure that this doesn't die in the dole.
Yeah, it's, excuse me, it's a good question. I think having that date out, Ledge Council, others will sort of keep this committee, whatever its format is, abreast. The Agency of Education will keep its eye on it as well.
Yep.
Superintendents Association, all those groups will work to make sure that implementation is ready by 2028.
What if AOE doesn't like it? And so who's gonna shepherd this thing through?
Yeah, so I
If
would.
we pass it,
Good question. I think, excuse me. Generally, groups like Superintendent Association, groups that it will really impact, School Board Association, others will sort of be our important people to touch base with during the process. And I think without a doubt, whether AOE likes it or not, they're going to have to follow the letter of the law as well as respond to any concerns out there in the field if it's not being implemented. Yeah, but no, that's a good question. It's always that sort of 2 years, what's going to happen. I think I'm the only one here that is here for life, but so the rest of you. Thank you.
Yes,
Appreciate
thank you all.
Yeah.
for the questions.
All set? Good to see you.
Yes, you, good afternoon. For the record, Jay Nichols, Executive Director of the Vermont Principals Association. I'll try to not hit on the things that were already done by Jeff and Colin. First of all, I'll say I think it's time that Vermont have a cooperative educational service agency. I did submit some written testimony, but I'm not gonna follow that. I think it does make sense to be looking at that this time. I did want to say that in section 2, there's some comment about cost benefit analysis. I just want to say whatever process there is for that should be as simple as possible. So if there's testimony around that, I sometimes people see much red tape, especially that are least well resource systems, and just say, we don't have time to do this, we're too busy. So I want to make it as simple as possible for places like that
To do that
to
analysis.
do that analysis. Yeah, really simple, yeah. And we like the idea of encouraging the BOLSI system and checking in a couple of years to see how well it's going, whether or not people are doing it, and then deciding, does it need to be expanded? Does mandating membership in some areas might be a possibility. Senator Williams mentioned about population concerns, and so in 1997, we had 127,000 kids, and that's before we had pre-K kids in most of our buildings. And now we're around 84,000 kids if you count pre-K kids. So, and the trend line doesn't look good. We could be in the high 60s, low 70s in another decade. So I'm much more worried about it. I would love to see us have a problem. Oh, we got way too many kids. It's an issue. So what can we do systemically, as Senator Campion talked about before, so that we're attracting families here and having people stay here? One of the number one things that attracts families are really your schools, of course. And along with that, of course, the housing thing is, I hear it all the time. Teachers that are turning down jobs, they haven't found a place to live. So I just wanted to share that with you.
And it'll be interesting to see after, whenever we can get our heads around a handle on it, is how many people we saw during the pandemic, exactly how many families, what folks are we seeing around climate? I think the foster flow, it's amazing what's happening along the coast of Massachusetts. Prices dropping, houses close to the water, people are heading to different states. So
It's hard
you
to
never know.
Yeah.
You never know. And I think that's Senator Williams' point. But
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that. We've been seeing this trend now for 2.5 decades.
Yeah.
And the demographics don't look good.
Yeah.
When you look at our demographics in Vermont, our 19 to 44-year-old population is our smallest population, percentage wise, in terms of percentage basis.
It's really interesting.
That's scary, because those are the ones that are making babies. We need more of them. So I do have that concern. I like Jeff Francis' comments about resources and equity at the system level. I do think we've done a pretty good job developing an educational funding model that is probably the most equitable in the nation. Independent studies have shown that over and over again with Act 60 and Act 68 and the way that we try to fund per pupil spending. But we still have resource-wise, teacher and administrator salary-wise, major differences from community to community. And our ability to provide resources for some kids in some communities still has a long ways to go. So that's a hope of mine that with a voluntary system like BOLSI's, and I totally agree, by the way, if we gotta get rid of that. I was a teacher at Alberg,
What was the
BOCES had
first
such a
part?
negative.
Yeah, what's the first part you said? Just cooperative education
Yeah.
services?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Tests.
Or entity
Yes.
or whatever. Yeah, you gotta make sure it's appropriate too, Senator. And I want to give an example. So I was thinking about when I was a superintendent of Franklin County. A model like this could really provide economy of scale and work at a county level with 3 or 4 superintendents sharing services. And what I started thinking about was when I left there 7 years ago, it was just when we were starting to really have the issues where kids that used to have like workers come in from like, in Chittenden County, it'd be the Howard Center. But in Franklin County, it was Franklin County Mental Health. They would have people come in and provide extra support for these kids that needed it. Those kids now, we have kids that are so much more in need than those kids were then. And schools are experiencing this all the time. And yet we have no place in the state of Vermont to send it. So if you get together some superintendents and some school boards and decided, if we could almost build our own school or our own program using an existing building to service 20, 30, 40 students, and I'm just using Franklin County, for example, in our system, as opposed to trying to send kids out, there's probably an economies of scale that you can save there. This local school district of Richford can't do that. The local school district of Berkshire is not gonna be able to do that. But if you put all these schools in the county together, that could happen. It also made me think, I don't know if you were a teacher then, but we had a thing called Rink, Daniel Pink in the Rink in Essex. Do you remember that? Well, that was an example where districts got together, Essex set it up, us, the rest of us kind of paid money into it. And brought in a national speaker, Daniel Pink, was one of my favorite speakers, and he talked about education, innovation, and things like that. We could do that for things like reading. We could have groups get together and say, okay, what's the best training that we want to really provide for all our K-3 teachers?
Yeah.
Let's get all the K-3 teachers in this BOCES area, and let's provide high quality professional learning for all the K-3 teachers in reading instruction, and let's do it together and partner. And I think there's ways that there's benefits, economies of scale that you do. A couple more thoughts. I agree on moving the dates back, effective dates and corresponding dates related to that. And I really wanted to touch on something Colin said. I hadn't thought much about the points that Colin made regarding retirement, pensions, and protecting employee rights. The VPA fully supports the categories of employees that may have moved or may move from a school district to BOCES and wants those employees' employment rights to be protected. One of the areas that there was some pushback in Act 46 in some places where some people use that as an opportunity to potentially say, now that you're becoming a new district, teachers might be losing some rights, and there's lots of anger over those things. We shouldn't go down that road again. And then lastly, a supervisory union,
Did approve true.
but
We're years behind on did approve true.
well, where I was working, we were able to essentially we came up with a new master agreement and all the teachers were held harmless. But that I don't know if that was true everywhere. We worked closely with our union to make sure that was the case. No, I didn't think so. I know there were some places where a lot of people felt like they were lost seniority or jobs, and that shouldn't happen. We have 800 to 1,000 teachers on provisional licenses. So teachers that are already experienced in that training, we don't want to be losing those folks over things like that. They're not appropriate. And to your question about supervisory unions, I'm a big believer in the Constitution of the United States. I'm not a big believer in Articles of Confederation. And to me, that's the difference. The supervisory union is like the Articles of Confederation. You can all participate, comment if you want to, but doesn't really have a lot of authority, whereas a school district does have authority. Where a supervisory union makes sense, and the reason Vermont went to that model, I don't know when it went to 1930s or whatever, was because as transportation came into being, they realized some of these services that need to be provided, our schools are too small to provide. So let's have a supervisory union, we'll have one superintendent that will kind of oversee it, they'll take care of negotiations. Eventually, they decided, well, we'll have a business manager that will help develop budgets for each of the school districts because we don't have the expertise in every school. And that's gone throughout history. And when the law changed, I think it's Act 153, where special educators became district employees and paras became district employees. And the whole idea of that was all around scale. And that's what supervisory unions
Sounds
do.
BOCES like.
It is BOCES-like. But here's the difference in BOCES. I don't have a law like 153 that I'm following. We are agreeing to articles of agreement. Our 3 supervisory unions, 3 of us are joining together and we're setting up these three areas that we're gonna work together. We decided it's gonna be literacy, K-3 teacher training. It's gonna be special education accommodations for students of certain diagnosis that would otherwise be sent out of the state. And it's gonna be professional learning for world language teachers, so to speak, and so. And then we do a members of agreement, we have a board member from each of our boards, we have somebody that oversees this, and we share our resources, and we hire those employees that are gonna do that. And they are employees of our new entity. And that's essentially what it would look like from my perspective. Does that make it any more clear? That whole thing? I'm not a big SU fan, even though I was SU superintendent for 11 years.
But I'm not, if you're, he's asking me. So I asked the other two gentlemen, BOCES versus super union or larger supervisory union. You know, what's your thought on the appropriate approach?
I personally am not a fan of supervisory unions, period. And I'm definitely not a fan of larger supervisory.
Okay, so that's fair.
I would rather have supervisory districts with one board to a district. In 2005 or 6, Jeff's in the room. We, as a superintendents, had a position paper that said, we think the best strategy would be to take all the supervisory unions in the state and make them single districts. And what was the legislation now? 883? Peter Pels and Joey Donovan and stuff met with us and came up with a compromise, which was 883, which didn't make it all the way through, but eventually kind of led to Act 46. And Act 46 was basically, from my perspective, compromised. But not much teeth in it in the end.
I always had you pegged as a federalist.
I know, right? Alexander Hampton, you know?
First time I met you. Thank you very much.
Well,
Ms. Zimmerman, I don't want to cut you short. Do you think you can,
Oh, I definitely
5
can.
minutes-ish?
Oh,
Because
I think I
in the
can do it
future, we
in
will
1 minute.
absolutely have you first.
Oh.
Just remind me,
perfect.
is that?
So you're.
Oh, I don't need to.
That's right.
Okay.
Little bit.
All right, Kara Zimmerman, Vermont School
Thank
Boards
you.
Association. I have testimony. A
Yes.
lot has been said. It was hard writing testimony because I knew this conversation would evolve. From a school board's perspective, I think there's adequate oversight baked into the bill through audits, annual reports, quarterly reports, potential representation, or the ability to designate appropriate representation on the board. So we're fine with that. Timelines, quite honestly, from like a school board's perspective, the heavy lift is gonna be, as Jeff had noted, is gonna be on the administration. I just think in terms of like kind of operationalizing this, the superintendent's gonna have to work with the board chair to come up with a plan. It won't be too dissimilar probably from like an Act 46 and sort of those exploratory conversations. They're gonna have to be special meetings. There's gonna have to be, everything that a school board does to consider this is gonna have to happen in open meeting, right? So it's gonna have to be baked into the annual meeting. There will be some special meetings on this. So the timeline will be what the timeline will be from our perspective, but if we have the administrative arm saying timeline should probably be pushed out, I think that's fine too. So that's what I have to say on that. Yeah, we are in support of the bill. And I would say, like, I kind of combed through our resolutions, just because we've explained to you before, resolutions serve as a foundation for all of our work here. And our members want to ensure equitable access for students and achieve cost effectiveness and also.
Yes.
Senator Weeks wanna go?
Yeah.
No?
Okay.
Thanks. Question for all four of you, not to answer right now, but you can ruminate on this a little bit. Mr. Francis likes to talk about the additive work that we do here, which is absolutely right. If we are to implement this, what, if anything, is there that we might be able to take away that could be helpful? And it doesn't need an answer right now, but it's just something that I was thinking about. Just to simplify, make life easier.
Senator Weeks.
Yeah, I did, if I could, thank you. I actually want to go back to a comment that Jay made in regards to his words, mandate. And I'm wondering what your thoughts were there, why what your thoughts were, what prompted
The
it?
only thing I was saying is that a lot of times again, Jay Nichols for the record, Vermont Principals Association, a lot of times we put forth ideas that don't ever amount to anything because nobody takes advantage of them. And it's just something I think that we need to be thinking about as we move forward. And I'm not saying necessarily it needs to be the BOCES model or SD, but at some point, some people are going to make some hard decisions in the state about what's the right size for a school, what's the right size for a district or a system, what's the right size for the number of students that we should have in a class, and what steps do we need to take to right size given the number of students that we have. And I think that's going to come down to nobody wants to close their own local school, and nobody wants to make those tough decisions in their own communities. I think at some point, the General Assembly is going to get the pleasure of trying to make those tough decisions.
Yeah, can I disagree with what Mr. Nichols is saying? I think sometimes when we leave these conversations to communities, they can really tear people and neighborhoods apart. I think they get very contentious, very personal. We all know when it comes to talking about your own kids, you're just not in a space to be very dispassionate and logical. So there's that piece of it. I also think, to your point, we have to make some hard decisions. And I know people want to get reelected, so they don't want to antagonize their voters. And yet, that's where the hard work is, and that's that. I couldn't agree with you more. I think people are gonna have to have courage moving forward.
And some, I can't imagine a legislature ever having a debate for hours on school size or classroom. I don't see that kind of thing happening. I mean, it's sort of, maybe, but tricky. And I'm not talking about angering people. I'm talking about the research that's out there and what is the role and the responsibility of the legislature in terms of class size, given we don't want to industrialize education. We have a range of kids out there that need a range of sort of needs and are going to fit into different spots. I mean, maybe someday we'll see, hey, all classes have to be a certain size or this is, but yeah, it'll be interesting. Senator Williams.
I just want to make a comment that, kind of what Jay said, I don't like doing things by committee. That's not where I came from. But, as long as people are being taxed and having to pay for property taxes, 18.5% to support the state education system, they're gonna have a say. And
Those folks.
until we come up with a different way to fund education, we're not gonna be able to have a say. So, that's what I want to say.
Ms. Zimmerman, any final thoughts on this?
Thoughts.
Okay,
Thanks for having me.
we're gonna take 10 minutes and we'll come back and jump into school construction. Thank you all very much.
Yeah,
Gordon, you wanna
great.
take us off?